I am Mari Kuraishi, the president of the Jessie Ball duPont Fund, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to another episode of our History and Heritage series. Today's topic is Jacksonville's multicultural history and changing demographics. And it is, I think, a topic that is worth remembering, celebrating, and understanding, especially as we as the latest census results indicate, another turn towards greater multiculturalism. So I am going to turn it over now to Ennis Davis, the MC of our series, who is incredibly knowledgeable about Jacksonville history in his own right, but he will be moderating a panel of additional experts, Yanira, Andrew, and Ray. And I think this will be an extremely enlightening discussion, and I hope to learn as much from it as you all. So over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Mari. I'm going to share my screen. So good afternoon. My name is Ennis Davis, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel discussion. As we go through this discussion, if you have any questions, please use the chat box to place those questions. And if you need any tech support, Dennis from duPont will be able to assist you as well through chat. Before we dive into the multicultural heritage of the city, we first would like to acknowledge that historically the land we refer to as Jacksonville today occupies its traditional homelands of the Timucua as well as other historical indigenous groups. We acknowledge that the historical and continuing impacts of colonization on the indigenous communities, and will continue to work to be more accountable to the needs and history of indigenous peoples. We encourage all attendees to learn more about the indigenous people in our community and their way of life here on their ancestral lands. Jacksonville has always been the product of a rich history of vibrant communities representing different geographies, cultures, and experiences. Together, our many communities influence our elected officials, urban planners, and cultural institutions. And it is critical that our diverse voices are heard and represented in the plans for our future. As we continue with this discussion, we also want you to we want you to actually help us know the following. How do you, or how did you find your voice in Jacksonville? How do you stay involved in this vibrant community? And what do you wish there was more of within our community? So feel free to share those thoughts in our chat. The Gullah Geechee are the descendants of Africans who were enslaved along the Atlantic coast between Wilmington, North Carolina, and St. Augustine, Florida, beginning as far back as the 16th century. Building dense communities in Jacksonville after the Civil War, their kinship, heritage, and collaboration made the city an early jazz and blues destination, leading in 1910 with the neighborhood of La Villa being the first location in the country where a documented live performance of the blues took place. Today, Jacksonville's Black population has grown to become home to the largest concentration of Gullah Geechee descendants in the United States. Between 1890 and 1920, 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States, typically associated with more well-known northern and Midwestern cities. Immigrant groups also found Jacksonville to be an attractive destination to pursue the American dream. Playing an important role in the rebuilding the city after the Great Fire in 1901, these communities formed many small ethnic enclaves that have largely been taken for granted and demolished over the years. Considered to be the gateway to Florida, the Bahamas, and Cuba, by the 1870s, Cuban cigar manufacturers have found Jacksonville to be an attractive location to process Havana tobacco. And by 1895, most of Jacksonville's cigar makers were clustered into two areas within walking distance of Bay Street in La Villa and the Cathedral District. Home to thousands of Cuban immigrants, Jose Marti visited the city 8 times during the 1890s to generate enthusiasm and financial support for Cuba's freedom movement. A combination of Cuba obtaining its independence, 1898, and the growth of Tampa's Ybor City eventually led to the decline of this community in the city's budding hand-rolled cigar industry. Between 1850 and 1882, over 300,000 Chinese immigrants entered the United States. In Jacksonville, this small community concentrated in one occupation, commercial laundries, owning 7 laundries by 1886 and 79% of the city's commercial laundries by 1920. Settling in an area where they could make a living, a small community grew along West Adams Street, adjacent to La Villa's red light district, which was known as the Line. This community faced the constant threat of discrimination, including the incident in 1900 where 32 laundrymen were arrested and held in jail facing deportation until they could prove that they were US citizens. Many of Jacksonville's early Greek settlers arrived from southern Greece and Turkey as sailors on ships that docked along the river during the 1890s. A stretch of West Bay Street between the new passenger railroad terminal and the downtown wharves quickly became a preferred location for the turn of the century Greek community. By 1910, this section of La Villa had become known as Railroad Road and home to about 50% of the Greek population due to Greek business owners employing residents, relatives, and others arriving from their homeland. Between 1890 and 1920, hundreds of immigrants arrived and settled in Jacksonville from an area of the Middle East that is now known and home to the countries of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and other territories. Early settlers established themselves as grocers, peddlers, and small business people and dispersed throughout the city instead of forming ethnic enclaves. By immersing themselves in the dominant culture, they gained an unusual level of acceptance compared to other cities. At the same time, religious institutions and social clubs have helped generations maintain their culture locally. Today, the city now boasts the city's 5th largest Syrian population and the 10th largest overall Arab American community in the United States. Between 1880 and 1920, nearly 4 million Italians migrated to the United States to escape depressed economic conditions. Many early US Italian communities began near rail yards, and Jacksonville was no exception. By 1910, 74% of the city's documented Italian residents resided near the former St. Johns River Terminal Company rail yard, which along with Hogan's Creek separated downtown's Cathedral District and the neighboring community of East Jacksonville. Many came from rural Southern Italy, working locally as tellers, fruit dealers, grocers, barbers, shoemakers, and in other trades. Historic trade partners with the capital of Puerto Rico, 90% of the goods ships to and from the mainland to the island of Puerto Rico comes through the city of Jacksonville. As a result, San Juan was declared as a sister city to Jacksonville in October 2009. Historically lumped into the generic term African-American, Afro-Puerto Ricans were a part and port of Jacksonville's segregation era Black community. For example, Puerto Rican-born pillar of Black society, Manuel Rivera operated Ashley Street's Manuel's Tap Room, a lounge and grill that was open 24 hours a day during the 1940s and 50s. Described by the NAACP as the finest of its kind in the South, Rivera hosted many up-and-coming jazz musicians, including Ray Charles before he found international fame. Overcoming Jim Crow in 1953, Rivera also opened his home to 3 young Black Jacksonville Brave players named Felix Mantilla, who was from Puerto Rico, Hank Aaron, and Horace Garner, thus integrating Major League Baseball in the Deep South. Early census records make finding the exact date of Jacksonville's first Filipino migrant a complicated one. However, many agree that the first wave of Filipino immigrants to the city of Jacksonville began in the 1940s as a result of heavy enlistment in the US Navy during World War II. At the time, the US Navy offered Filipinos a path to American citizenship. By the 1950s, 90% of North Florida's Filipino population was linked some way to the American military. Today, this community makes up about 35% of the local Asian population and about 10% of the city's total immigrant population, concentrated in two principal hubs on the west side and south side north of the University of North Florida. Jacksonville's Filipino community is the largest in Florida and one of the largest in the Southeast. Duval County's Hispanic population has increased from 2.6% in 1990 to 11.3% in 2020. As a result, the cultural makeup, development pattern, flavor of long-established neighborhoods across the city continue to evolve. Today, there are thousands of people of Latin and Caribbean descent, including from countries such as Mexico, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, and Venezuela residing in town and reimagining neighborhoods such as the West Side's 103rd Street corridor in Spring Park near Inglewood. As Jacksonville becomes a majority community, modern ethnic enclaves will grow and bring unique character to once very bland suburban thoroughfares across the city. For example, Jacksonville's Indian community reflects the diversity of India itself as the population rapidly grows, with families moving to the area for economic opportunities. As a result, since the late 1990s, a stretch of Bay Meadows Road has morphed into a corridor characterized by restaurants, groceries, salons, offices, and other businesses representing a rich fusion of the various cultures of India. The same can be said for University Boulevard, which has long been an area of focus for refugees from various countries. Here, several apartment communities work with resettlement agencies, which prefer to locate refugees in similar communities as it helps them improve their social life when they first move to the area and decreases the feeling of being alone. As a result, neighborhoods along this corridor have become some of the most diverse in the city. Today, residents of Eastern European descent from countries such as Ukraine, Bosnia, and Albania, along with a rapidly growing Hispanic community, make up a large percentage of their population. As we continue our quest to discover and build upon what makes Jacksonville a special place, highlighting our multicultural history and changing demographics should be at the top of the list. With this in mind, we're honored to have you join us today for this virtual conversation. We hope that this discussion helps each of us gain an appreciation for Jacksonville's BIPOC communities, that's Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, as well as understand the multicultural influence on the future of Jacksonville via the 2020 census results, and identify opportunities for individuals to help build a more inclusive and diverse community. I'll be a moderator today, and I'm honored to be joined with three great panelists. Our panelists are Andrew Pantazi, previously reporting for the Florida Times-Union and now founding editor of the Tributary, a Northeast Florida journalism collective. Andrew and his team dove deep into the 2020 census results and just launched a newsletter highlighting the impact of those results on Florida's lawmaking. We also have Dr. Ray Oldakowski, who is an award-winning professor of geography at Jacksonville University, whose work focuses on polling, public opinion research, and Florida's sense of place and cultural geography. And then we have Janita Cardona, or Yaya, owner of Yaya Productions, a production company focused on serving Jacksonville's Hispanic community, and program manager for Moving the Margins, which is a collaboration between the Jacksonville Cultural Development Corporation, and the Jessie Town in downtown. So feel free to use the chat room to post your questions or comments for the panelists to answer. So the first panelist I have a few questions for is going to be Andrew. So Andrew, what has surprised you or didn't surprise you about the census results? What are you seeing that stands out as you analyze this data? And then how do you see the effect of Jacksonville's built environment and changes over time reflected in our demographics?
Thanks, Ennis. I appreciate that. The number one thing that surprised me, and I can put this up in a slide as well if this works. Give me a sec. Is that our county population grew at how fast it grew. It grew fast enough that we are now larger than Pinellas, which is where St. Petersburg is. I was not expecting that. I knew that we had been growing. We saw this year to year with the American Community Survey. But now that we're the 6th most populous county, up from the 7th, I think that says something about where we are in Florida. And you add on to that the St. Johns County explosive growth, which we already knew. That means our region was growing faster, Northeast Florida as a whole, faster than the rest of the state. So it was surprising to me to see just how much we are growing faster than the state, which is going to lead to even more of an emphasis on Northeast Florida for anybody who is running a political campaign, anybody who when we're doing redistricting, we're going to get more legislative seats that are based here, more people who are coming from here, and so that was the first thing just right off the bat when I was looking at the census data, trying to see the overall population numbers. The other one is obviously our racial demographics are growing more diverse. We are now majority non-white in not just Jacksonville, but also Duval County. And I expected Jacksonville to reach that, but I was surprised that when you add in the beaches in Baldwin that we reached that as well. And to give just, to answer one of the questions you gave to the whole audience about like themselves and where they come from, I did want to give at least my understanding when I look at census data, like anybody else, as I look granularly at where I live and at my home base. This is where I live. This is our makeup. And just as Ennis was talking about earlier, when you dive deeper, the census doesn't track immigration, but the American Community Survey that the Census Bureau runs in between does. And so this is the census tract that has the largest number of Bosnian residents. This has a very large number of Hispanic immigrants, particularly from Honduras. This has a lot of people from Asia as well, particularly Cambodia, Burma, immigrants living in the neighborhood that I'm at, which is off of Powers. So just to give a sense of, when I was looking at the granular neighborhood level, you're seeing particularly on the South side in neighborhoods like mine, an explosion in racial diversity as that Hispanic immigrant population comes in, adding to the pre-existing immigrant populations that were already here, that long-standing century-old Arabic population, as well as the 1990s based Bosnian Albanian population that moved mostly on the South side. So this is our overall as a county where we're at. The white non-Hispanic population, as I said, is now less than half. The Black population grew as a share, which a lot of other places that's not happening. Just to give you a sense of where we're at, nationally, we have a larger Black population than any of the largest cities in the country as a share of our population, except for Philadelphia. So larger than Chicago, larger than New York, larger than LA, as a share of our population. And in a lot of those other cities, the Black population is shrinking or staying stagnant, while the Hispanic population and Asian populations are growing. In Duval, the Hispanic and Asian populations are growing, but so is the Black population, which is, I think, continuing to contribute to the just the diversity we have here. And then this is the change in the white share of the largest cities. So it's also not universal, this diversifying that's happening. Some populous cities like Denver, for example, is becoming more white pretty quickly. It's actually losing its non-white population as it prices out people who can't afford to live in the city. Austin is about flat. It's not getting any more diverse in Austin, Texas. We were one of the more rapidly diversifying cities among the most populous cities. And so I think that we're also seeing that. We started out less diverse than some other places, but because of how fast we're growing, we're becoming quickly a much more diverse city. And I know Yaya is going to talk a bit about that as well as we think about some of these populations that are growing here. And then again, just to give kind of that neighborhood level idea of what Jacksonville looks like, first looking at the Black versus white populations in Jacksonville. This is not a surprising map to anyone, except maybe just how high the percentages are, just how much we are a segregated community still. You know, you have Ortega where there is 0.1% of the population is Black. That means that they found like one person on the entire like peninsula of Ortega. And then you have places over by Moncrief that are 93% Black. And so you see just how much where you live in Jacksonville really changes how you perceive the community that you're in. And then similarly for the white population, Ortega is 92% non-Hispanic white, while Moncrief is 2.3% white. And so if you live in your community and you don't go to other parts of Jacksonville, you might think that Jacksonville is either all white or that no white people live in Jacksonville because of just how much things like I-10 as a segregating line separate parts of Jacksonville from other parts, and I-95 separating from, you know, the east side of 95 from the west side of 95. You can see that particularly on the north side where Ocean Way is this growing community, but it's predominantly white, does not have a large Black population. Yet you go just a little bit over to the other side of I-95 and you have a very large Black population. And so the built environment is still serving as that barrier in Jacksonville. And then this is just to look at that Asian and Hispanic added together population, which is a lot of particularly immigrant communities. So you mentioned, you know, we have the Filipino immigrant community here, we have the Indian immigrant community, and then we have the very diverse Hispanic diaspora that has been moving to Jacksonville. And it's largely on the south side, a little bit on the west side. It's particularly over by Kernan. You know, it's by FSCJ over there. You'll find a lot of the both Hispanic and Filipino populations in that community. And so this is where, again, if you don't live in certain neighborhoods, you have a false view of Jacksonville. I've heard so many times from people things like there's no good tacos or there's no good Mexican food or Hispanic food. And I'm like, well, I've got like a pupuseria opening up less than a mile away from my house. I have pupusas I get from another place up the road because the Honduran population over here, there's a taco truck that every Friday from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. is out in front of a Latin sports bar. Like you're just not living in that area. You live in Riverside, which is a very white neighborhood. And that's why you think that. And so for people to understand, just because they're not seeing something does not necessarily mean it's not happening in the community. It's just due to a lot of factors, the built environment. So here, what you see where I live, what's particularly notable is this is where the railroads are. Near the railroads, there are cheaper housing. And because of that, that's where a lot of immigrant communities have settled. And so if you don't live over near the railroads, you can live just a little bit further toward St. John's River, and it's very white. And so understanding just how much those simple built environments, whether it's a highway, whether it's the railroad, can significantly affect that. I'm going to stop sharing real quick or pause sharing so I can switch over to the other thing I wanted to show, which is the website I built so that people can explore themselves. So let's see, is that working all right for people? Ennis, is that showing up?
Yes.
Okay, so this is for Northeast Florida, all of the counties, every person in the census data mapped out according to their census block based on race. And so you can see, again, just on a more granular level, where there is stark segregation and where different roads, so here you see Roosevelt as a separating line with Murray Hill and with Riverside, and how you have a much whiter Riverside, but a much more diverse once you cross Roosevelt. And then I-10 and I-95 in particular serving as these dividing lines that create a segregated community. And for our history with Jacksonville, going back to consolidation, what that's meant in terms of cutting off or choking resources in the community, and how much we still have a lot of work to do. So even as Jacksonville becomes more diverse, there are pockets that are becoming more integrated on the south side, but it still just drops in the bucket because overall Jacksonville as a whole has very deeply segregated, whether you're Ortega or Mandarin, which are segregated in white, the beaches, particularly Neptune and Jacksonville Beach, which are very overwhelmingly white. We still are not seeing the diversity on a neighborhood level across the community that we need to see for a more just and a more equal society. And I don't know, I feel like I might have been talking way too long, Ennis, so feel free to cut me off and let me know if there's any questions that are coming in.
You are good on time. There is a question about how can we access the map, and a link has just been posted to answer that.
Perfect. Anything else you wanted me to touch on, Ennis, on this point?
No, I think we'll just go to Ray, and then once we get through with each of you, I'll take any additional questions that come in through Q&A.
Perfect.
But that was a great presentation, and it's so revealing to, especially that dot map. I think that's very important when it comes into public engagement and outreach and planning for the future of the city, because I don't think, personally speaking, I don't think we're necessarily penetrating large pockets of our diverse community when we're deciding the future for this community, which is more majority now than of years past. So I'm going to move on to you, Ray, Dr. Ray Otakowski. I have a couple questions for you. The first is, so your work has been focused on the characteristics of our population change as evidenced by the U.S. Census. Can you talk a bit about what you're seeing in terms of those changes? And then to what do you attribute our change in migration patterns? And the last question I'd like to hear more from you about is, so based on your work with cultural geography, what do you think we need to be doing at the city, the business, and nonprofit level to adequately plan for people who are coming to Jacksonville?
Ray, I think you may be muted.
Thank you very much. I was muted. Colin, actually, it's the slide before that. And as Andrew mentioned, the Jacksonville area, Jacksonville itself, and Duval County grew by a significant amount, about 130,000 people. When you track population change, it's pretty easy to understand how the population changes because there's 4 factors involved. You take people that are born, people that die, people that move in, and people that move out. And that helps to explain how our population changes. The United States is very meticulous about keeping track of when people are born and people die. And you can look at the Florida Department of Health, which gathers what we refer to as vital statistics. This is the number of births and deaths. And you can see a close correlation with this with the census data because the census takes place on April 1st 2010, 2020, and the vital statistics data are kept on a yearly basis. So if we look at Duval County, which is the slide to the left, you can see that we had about 128,000 births over the 10-year period from 2010 to 2019, December 31st, 2019, about 78,000 deaths, which gave us a natural increase of around 49,500 people. For Duval County, that represented about 40% of our population growth. If you look over at the state of Florida on the right, there were about 2,190,000 births and about 1,890,000 deaths, which gave us a natural increase of around 300,000 people, which represents only about 11% of the state's population growth. So the state's population growth is going to come much more from migration, whether it be internal within the United States or immigration, as opposed to natural increase. Now, one of the reasons for that is because Duval County has a much younger age structure than the state of Florida as a whole. So if you look at some of the statistics beneath those for Duval County, you can see that our population age 65 and over is only about 14.5%, where the population for the state 65 and over is about 21%. So the state has a lot older age structure, which would mean they would have less births, because generally the birthing years are considered from 15 to 45. What was interesting in looking at this data is the fact that Jacksonville's age-adjusted death rate is higher than the state of Florida. And what that means is that we're seeing an increased number of deaths compared to the state for our population age 65 and under. So if you look at that last number, the number of deaths or the percentage of deaths occurring in Duval County for the population age under 65 is about 35%, more than a third, whereas it's only about a quarter for the state of Florida. So one of the things that we're going to need to think about as we see our population increasing is to increase access to healthcare. If you look at the causes of death, Jacksonville actually has higher rates of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes than the state of Florida, and that's leading to our increase in death rates of persons under 65 years old. We go to the next slide, Colin. Now, if we look at the data on where the remainder of our population growth comes from, it's going to come from migration. And given that we grew, we obviously have more in migration than we have out migration. And this is both at the national level, at the state level, and then the international level. So let's take a look at the national level first. And what I've done is put up some selected states to look at, the states that we have the most interaction with. And the numbers that you see on the map, the black numbers are the numbers of persons from that state that moved to Duval County. So for example, if we look at Georgia, 18,569 households moved to Duval County. And this data comes from the Internal Revenue Service. And what they do is they track the zip code in which a tax return was filed. So if they see a Georgia zip code for, let's say, 2018, and then a Duval County zip code for 2019, they classify that as an in-migration of a household to Duval County. So we received approximately 18,500 immigrants from, or migrants from Georgia to Duval County, but we also sent out 16,660 households from Duval County to Georgia. So there was a lot of interaction between Duval County and Georgia, which obviously makes sense. We're close to the border, so we would have a large interaction with Georgia. We also had a large interaction with a quickly growing state, Texas. And as you can see, we have a net decrease that over 10,000 families from Duval County moved to Texas, about 9,000 moved into Duval County, which kind of explains why you see a lot of Texas license plates around the area, but a net loss there. California, we also had a lot of in-migration and out-migration from, but you can tell from the numbers it's pretty much close, kind of a wash with California. One of the most surprising things, something we associate with other parts of Florida, but not necessarily Northeast Florida, is this concentration of families moving or households moving from the Northeast to Duval County. So from New York, over the 10-year period, we had 7,000 households moving from New York to Duval County. Only about 4,000 moved up to New York, so a net increase of about 3,000 households there. And similar large increases, of course, not the same volume, but New Jersey, about 4,000 households from New Jersey moving to Duval County, only about 1,500 going back, and about 3,500 households from Pennsylvania moving to Duval County, about 1,900 moving out. We also gained migrants from Virginia, from Illinois, and then as you can see, North Carolina, it was almost an equal number. And one of the things about this map is it lets us know where people have moved from, but of course, it's only for people that have filed tax returns. So a lot of times it's not going to include immigrant families if they're moving directly into Jacksonville, into the Duval County area, or if they're moving from another part of the state or the country, but they did not file a tax return that prior year. So about 60% of our population growth came from migration. The number of households coming into Duval County was about 16,000. If you approximate 2 or 3 persons per household, you can see that we still have a significant number of people that would have moved in as immigrants from other parts of the United States or directly into Jacksonville. When you look at Jacksonville, and Colin, we can go to the next slide. When you look at Jacksonville within our metro area, one of the things that I explain to people is that Jacksonville, as the central city of our metropolitan area, has the job of attracting people from other locations in the country, but then redistributing them through our metropolitan area. A lot of us are familiar with the process of suburbanization. So you'll see people move to Duval County or be drawn to the Jacksonville metro area because of Jacksonville. So this slide shows us that for each one of the counties in our metro area, we have a net loss of households, a net loss of over 8,800 households going to St. Johns County. You can see a difference of about 5,000 households there. Clay County, about 2,000 households, and then smaller numbers to Baker and Nassau. But that's actually Jacksonville's job, is to bring people in from other places and then redistribute them throughout the metropolitan area. So about 56,000 people moved to Jacksonville from our suburban counties, about 65,000 people moved out, and that creates that discrepancy that you see as far as Jacksonville sending people to the suburban counties, but not bringing back as many. And then the last thing I wanted to look at was then Jacksonville's role within the state of Florida. So if we could go to the next slide, Colin. This looks at in-state migration excluding our suburban counties. And if you take out our suburban counties, as I mentioned, which should be getting population growth from us, we actually do a good job at drawing people from other parts of the state. So if you look down in the South Florida, for example, Miami-Dade sent about 6,000 households to Jacksonville. About 4,300 households from Jacksonville went to Miami-Dade. So we have a net increase from South Florida, both Miami-Dade, Broward, and even Palm Beach, but to a smaller degree, sent more households to Jacksonville than we lost to them. I also put up the 2 university counties that we have here in North Florida, Leon County and Alachua County. Notice that over the 10-year period, we gathered about 1,200 additional households from Alachua County, about 1,200 additional households, 1,300 additional households from Leon County. And that's not going to be characterized as kids moving out of Duval County to go to the University of Florida and then moving back when they graduate, because they're probably not filling out a tax form as they leave Duval to go to school. But what it might represent are graduates who perhaps are graduate students or undergraduates as they graduate, who find Jacksonville an attractive location after they graduate in terms of jobs and things along that line. So some encouraging news for Jacksonville as far as how we interact with the rest of the state. If you look at this historically, most of our population growth over the last 10 years from migration occurred after 2014. It's been in the last 6 years. And I looked at the IRS migration data over the last 20 years, and obviously the housing crash, the credit crash in 2008 limited migration. And so from around 2008 to 2014, there was sort of a lull in migration activity. But since 2014, 2015, that increase of 16,000 households from internal migration that we've gotten in Jacksonville has been a result of people moving to the county. So it seems as if the effects of that housing bubble have worn off. And then as far as the question you asked about what do we need to be doing as a community to deal with this increasing immigration or migration and immigration, which leads to diversification of the area. Obviously, we have to think about it on an individual level. What sorts of things do people need when they first move to a community? One of those would be housing. And I was looking at a recent article where a real estate agent said that what Jacksonville needed to do was provide more affordable housing for people moving into the area. And she characterized that as housing in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. And any of you that have a few years under your belt, like I do, sort of was taken aback by the fact that $200,000 to $300,000 is affordable housing. I'm sure we need housing even at a less expensive level to accommodate some of the folks that are moving into the area. Also have to think about transportation, education, being able to provide education to people, and think about the fact that we are part of a metropolitan network. We're a node for a metropolitan network, and we don't just service the people within our county, and not only not just the people that are in the suburban counties. Our extent goes beyond that. So from Brunswick, Georgia to Gainesville to Palatka, we have to think about people that rely on Jacksonville for all sorts of goods and services. When people need to use an airport, they come to Jacksonville. When people need to get specialized medical care like proton treatment for cancer, they have to come to Jacksonville. Even when people want to shop at something like IKEA, they're coming from long distances to Jacksonville. So our responsibility is not only to our local community, but also to the region of Northeast Florida, as Andrew mentioned, which is growing, that we serve as a node for. And I know I've taken more time than I was supposed to, so thank you, Ennis.
I really appreciate that. Again, this is very informative, especially when planning for the future of the city. So Yaya, I have a few questions for you as well. The first question is, what are the most important actions that people can take to be good advocates for our BIPOC and Latino communities in Jacksonville? And also, you're involved now in an initiative to create space for difficult conversations. What characteristics do you see as a part of those conversations that make them most successful?
Well, it's like what you said. I find that Jacksonville, we tend to be stuck in our areas. Like what Andrew said, people in Orange Park stay in Orange Park. People on the west side stay on the west side. They don't really go towards the beaches. The people from the beaches don't even like to cross the bridge, as they say, to come to downtown. So like, how can you get more involved when you don't want to leave your area? People are just so comfortable staying in that area. So get to know your neighborhoods, get to know what restaurants out there. There's so many right now. There's so many great restaurants opening cultural restaurants. Especially in the San Jose area. I'm noticing the San Jose area is becoming like a cultural mecca for food. You'll find authentic Brazilian food there, authentic Peruvian food there, authentic Cuban food there. So it's becoming like a melting pot of cultural food. So if you're not going out and exploring these areas, you're really missing out. And not just that, there's a lot of groceries, little groceries mart everywhere. Everyone's opening up a grocery mart that has authentic food from that country. So you get, and then a lot of them have restaurants inside of them too. So my thing is go out, explore your region. Arlington, South Arlington is a great area also to explore. It's one of the biggest Hispanic populations here, but Arlington is underdeveloped, you know? It's not, I'm noticing that the city of Jacksonville is focusing on other counties like St. Johns County, but they're not focusing on the areas where they really need to develop them. Arlington is an area that has so many rundown buildings and neighborhoods that could be, you know, brought up to date and really, you know, get bigger populations to come in. So my thing is explore more your area. Don't just stay where you're at, because Jacksonville is so diverse and is so big that you're missing out.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I'm going to take a few questions here from the audience that are in the chat box and the Q&A box. First question is for Ray. Is the elder death rate of Northeast Florida the same for whites as the BIPOC community?
The death rates are higher in the Black community than they are in the white community. They do not break down the actual disease rates by race, but they are higher. And again, given that Jacksonville has really some world-class medical facilities here in the community, it has to be a question of access to healthcare. As both Andrew and Yaya have mentioned, people staying within their neighborhoods, perhaps as far as their activities go, there's also restrictions about where people will consider as part of their activity space to be able to go for healthcare, to look for health services. And that's something that the city needs to address, whether it's through creating new medical services in different parts of town or providing mobile medical services or things along that line.
And can I say add to that? The reason why also, I mean, at the end of the day, Hispanics and African Americans, we have a high percentage of dealing with diabetes, heart disease, all cancer. So of course you're going to see that rate be higher because we do have those. And like what Dr. Ray was saying, a lot of Hispanics do not know about the services that are available to them that is free. So that's something that I am huge about. I love to, for example, there's a service here, there's a nonprofit here that if you have a kid under the age of 6 and they have a car seat and you don't know if you're using the right car seat, you could go to them and they could provide you with a free car seat for your child. So there's so many services and medical help that's available, but they're not necessarily being reached to the Hispanic and the BIPOC community that really needs it. So that's one of the issues that we're seeing is like, how can we really start informing our BIPOC community about these services that are available?
And I wanted to piggyback on something that Dr. Ray was saying, which is in 32209 is our most segregated Black zip code. If you scrape, which I've scraped all the data from the Florida Medical Licensing Board. So I have every physician and where they say their practice is located. There are no doctors in 32209 except for 4 who are at a Medicare facility in 32209 outside of UF Health and the VA. So you've got UF Health, which is there, which is great if you can get to UF Health. And obviously UF Health has its own struggles that it has to overcome because it is serving in customers, clients, patients who do not have private health insurance as much as the other hospitals do. And so from a funding perspective, they are hurt. The state of Florida passed a law that said Jacksonville and only Jacksonville is not allowed to pass an indigent care tax. We are the only place in the state of Florida where we're not allowed to do that. The way they framed the law was that all county consolidated governments are not allowed to pass this. We're the only county consolidated government. It was a specific law directly to stop us from being able to fund UF Health. And there have been efforts over the years to try to overturn that to allow Jacksonville to have that opportunity. But when you look at the medical access, we have top tier facilities, but if you can't get into those communities, if you don't have a regular primary care doctor, then your experience with the medical field is you go to the emergency room when you have a problem, because where else are you going to go? Are you going to drive all the way, far away when you have a job that you might lose the job? You might not have steady access to a car. We don't have the sort of reliable public transportation infrastructure that other communities have. When you get into all of these things, it really inhibits the access to medical care. And even all of that is coming in on the back end, because on the front end, you have in Jacksonville, a lot of the industrial facilities used to be placed in these neighborhoods where they were polluting into the ground. And so we had these Superfund sites. We have this lead and arsenic poisoning. You go to Moncrief and the creeks around there are all poisoned with arsenic, and yet people eat the fish out of those creeks. And so on the back end, you don't have the healthcare to treat you when you get sick. On the front end, we have an environment that the way it was built, we did not take care of certain land. And that land, by intention, is also the land where we have segregated Black communities. And that is also affecting the long-term health outcomes.
And just to piggyback really quick, also, what we were talking about these cities, we have a problem with our transportation here in Jacksonville. A lot of BIPOC and Hispanics that are migrating here, a lot of them don't have cars. So, and the bus transportation here is horrible. And who rides the bus? The majority that you see are BIPOC and Hispanic community. And so that's another reason of how can we work with the transportation so we can provide these services to these communities that desperately need it.
Okay, great. I've got tons of questions coming in now. So I'm going to scroll back up here. And here's a general comment. It is, I believe I heard Dr. Odakowski say that it is Jacksonville's job to disperse people to the surrounding counties. As Ms. Cardona is discussing, there is a lot of undeveloped potential in Jacksonville. Should we be encouraging people not to leave?
Yes, and by Jacksonville's job, I mean it's the job of a central city to draw people into an area and then redistribute them throughout the area. But they certainly, given that we have a consolidated city and 900 square miles within Jacksonville, we certainly should be trying to keep people within the county, because a lot of the extent of our county would be considered part of a suburban network. And given that we're not thinking of a metro system where there's a bunch of suburbs, different suburban governments competing for resources and for people, it should be an easier task for Jacksonville to be able to direct people and development towards certain neighborhoods than it would be if we were a fragmented type of metro area like Chicago or Miami, where you have lots of different municipalities competing with each other.
Okay, and I'm going to move on to the next question here, try to get as many as I can. The current in-state migration into Duval County in Jacksonville abroad has culminated in a public nuisance, the effects of which confront all aspects of human development due to historical neglect due to underfunded and overpaid projects. How can we address equity to ensure economic development meets local residents who have more at stake to lose? This is for anybody.
I think we need to, honestly, I am a firm believer in going to your council meetings, going to the town hall meetings. And that's what I'm noticing that, and my generation, we're lacking in doing that. we need to start voicing our opinion and really letting the city know. The city has public meetings about budgeting, whether it's in the arts. They have a budget for arts, they have a budget for nonprofit, they have a budget for absolutely everything. And so if you really want to make a difference, then you really need to start getting involved in the city and getting involved in your city meetings, writing your city councilwoman, letting them know that you need XYZ needs more funding, because it's true. We're lacking funds in a lot of things. I'm not a firm believer in taking money away from the police, right? But I do believe that maybe that money should be, some of that money should be allocated to more nonprofits that help the youth. You know what I mean? That could help develop and make more programs. So I think we need to find a better way for the city to budget the funds to help get these programs that we need.
All right. And I'm going to bounce this one. It's for anyone, I guess. Is there a correlation between segregated residential housing patterns and home values?
Yes. Segregated white neighborhoods have high home values. Segregated Black neighborhoods have low home values. And what we also see, which can be papered over just by that, because sometimes we then think of it as, okay, well, then maybe it's more affordable in certain neighborhoods. But when you look at some of our neighborhoods where there's a segregated Black community that has less access, those homes often need work. If you are attempting to purchase a home, they need an investment to be able to do this. And then a lot of the homes are not owned by people. They're owned by LLCs, by investors who are out of state. And so when we have public policy that is designed around what do we do, whether it's blighted or cleaning up or fixing these homes, it's not dealing with the reality that the people who own these homes are not people at all. They're companies, they're sometimes in state, sometimes out of state that you can't easily identify. But those home values are much, much lower in segregated communities that are Black as opposed to the segregated white communities.
Okay, here's another quick question about migration. Do you think our military presence is a major explanation for some of this migration to Jacksonville?
Yes, I'm a Navy brat. I moved here in 2004, and the reason why, because the third biggest naval base was in Puerto Rico, Roosevelt Roads, and it closed. And when that closed, the majority of the people that were stationed in Roosevelt got stationed here in Jacksonville. So I'm sure anyone who saw the census, you guys probably saw a big boost in the 2003, 2005 era of military come here, but it's particularly Puerto Ricans and Hispanics, but more Puerto Ricans. So I'm gonna say yes, I'm a Navy brat, and the military people that are, the Hispanic military people that are here are more conservative, and I think that's why Jacksonville will always be a conservative city too, because it is a military town. And so, yes, to answer that question, I say yes.
And I'll just, oh, go ahead, Ray.
No, you can't, Andrew. I'll go after you.
I was just going to say, in addition to the Puerto Rican community, I'd also point to the Filipino community in town. That's directly tied to our Navy bases in Jacksonville. It's one of the reasons we have the largest Filipino community in the South, and it's been a big part of the cultural identity for many in the Filipino community. I mean, even you go back to the last mayoral election, Anna Brochet, who is attempting to be the first Filipina elected as mayor, has a Navy background. So a lot of that's definitely true, and that's also, I think, can explain some of the migration patterns within the county with where they're located. Where a lot of the Filipino community is off of Kernan in that area, which is fairly close to Mayport. And so I think that, while not being as pricey as trying to move into Atlantic Beach or Neptune or Jax Beach.
And the biggest Puerto Rican population is in Kernan also.
And I was going to add in, if you do look at the migration data, San Diego, a big supplier of migrants to Jacksonville, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, both big suppliers. As a matter of fact, 10 years ago, they were the largest suppliers. Now Jacksonville's kind of worked its way into this business network in the South, so that we're seeing people come from Phoenix, from Houston, but from Charlotte, but San Diego, Virginia Beach, Norfolk have always been big suppliers. And even though that data doesn't really provide reasons for migration, you would have to start to wonder if communities like San Diego, which are noticeably more expensive than Jacksonville, and one of Jacksonville's selling points to people moving in is a lower cost of living, whether we're starting to become a retirement community for military personnel, that after they've done their 20 years, and not necessarily talking about people in their 60s or 70s, but people in their 50s moving to Jacksonville for second careers. So.
And one more thing I'll add on to that, and I do like this question. I want to dive into the census data on on group quarters to see how many people are living on military bases versus were 10 years ago. But one thing we are seeing is that the military population is a smaller portion of our population than it used to be. I mean, this goes back to the decommissioning of the Kennedy, as many people in Mayport and Atlantic Beach are still waiting for that nuclear carrier to come to Jacksonville that was long promised and never came. We lost a significant amount of military personnel from that, Cecil further back. And so we do have fewer military, which means our growth is driven more today than it would have been in the past by non-military migration.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. I know we're a little bit past 1, and there are several other questions here. If you guys don't mind, I'll take one more question and then for the entire group, and then we'll try to get individually back with the others and answer their questions. You want to stay on for one more question, guys? You got time?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so the next question, let's see. Get a long one here. All right. So considering the lack of access to services, the poor public transit system, and the growing affordable housing crisis, should Jacksonville be encouraging more infill and urban style development that allows for greater walkability, housing supply, and access? And then how do we improve our current suburban style zoning code to resolve these issues? That's for anyone. I know I threw a mouthful at you. Well, as an urban planner, I'll jump in and just answer that one real quick. I would say most certainly, if anything, from looking at the data that has been shown today, there are several communities that are changing and diversifying, but they're not actually downtown. They're actually pretty far away from downtown. And these are communities that need enhanced transit services, enhanced access to healthcare. One of the ways to do that is to change our zoning policies to allow for more affordable infill, especially when you have these sites where big retail centers are starting to die out and close down. These are actually potential redevelopment sites. And then from a transportation perspective, we do have to look at ways to better connect these areas and not realize that, actually realize that Jacksonville is a lot more than just downtown. So by connecting these areas to people who need access to services the most, we actually help downtown in the city as a whole. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and we will try to answer the remaining questions. I would like to say that this is the 4th of 6 virtual discussions that we're having this year as a part of this History and Heritage series, which is co-produced by the Jessie Ball duPont Fund and myself of the Jaxson Magazine. Our 5th event will be hosted virtually on Friday, October the 22nd, and it will expose and highlight the topic of with gentrification of neighborhoods that are seeking to avoid gentrification as the revitalization process continues across various neighborhoods in our community. So we love to have you join us for that. So stay tuned for more details by following the Jaxson Mag on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. In closing, I want to thank all of our panelists and all our guests for taking this time to spend with us today. Enjoy your weekend.